I'm willing to bet that the twist at the end of this story will make your jaw drop to the floor. This is my craziest jail story, not my prison story. That's one I haven't told yet, but in the county jail, this is about as wild as it got for me. However, my wildest jail story actually begins outside of jail, a few years before I was ever arrested. I was 18 years old, hanging out with a few friends when several of us got a text message, and some people even got a phone call. Regardless, we were all alerted to the fact that one of our good, close friends, named Amber, had been murdered. It had happened while she was at her boyfriend's house, right there in our small, close-knit town. A man pulled in the driveway, entered the home, shot them both multiple times, repeatedly beat them with a nearby laptop, and then set the entire house on fire before leaving. Of course, our whole circle of friends and family were devastated by this. He was an amazing person who was loved by so many, and this type of thing, the nature of this murder and the details of it, it just didn't happen around here. Unfortunately, as the years went by and I turned 21, the man who did it had never been caught. Around this age, I was starting what would go on to be my 10-year sentence for my crimes. And right now, I was still in the county jail awaiting my court date. At this point, it had been years since the murder, and for the most part, I had dealt with it and moved on, as you would expect. Until the day I found myself right in the middle of the cell block, staring right into Amber's face. I had sat down to play some cards with the fellow inmates, and right there on the playing cards, it was her face, her picture. Many jails, prisons probably too, have special card decks that have the pictures and names of missing persons and also unsolved murders on them. And there was Amber's, right there in my hand. I almost started to tell the other guys, hey, I actually knew this girl very well, but I didn't. Guess I didn't think they'd care, or maybe I didn't want to bring up that conversation and maybe bring up some old emotions. Now, this was also my first day in a new cell block in that county jail, and the one I was in previously, nobody really had any cards for whatever reason, so I hadn't actually even seen them yet. This was my first time. And again, since it was my first day in this new cell block, once it was lockdown time for the day, I finally met my new cellmate. His name was Scott, but everyone called him Lowe because that was his last name, but it was also a perfect one-word description of his whole demeanor. He was always very down in the dumps. Some inmates even jokingly called him Eeyore, the donkey from Winnie the Pooh, just because of how mopey he was all the time. But despite that, he was friendly enough. Pretty decent guy. We're cellmates. He would offer me food, noodles, a snack if he looked and saw I didn't really have anything to eat that night, just your basic friendly gestures. And after about a week or so in there, we got pretty close, or as close as you can get to someone when you're forced to share a room with each other in jail. And I would try to help lift his spirits, joke around with him, get him to open up, share some stories from my life, maybe my childhood, hopefully encouraging him to open up and do the same. And let's just take our minds somewhere else for a little while. That's what you do. That's how you pass the time. But it was no use. I mean, he'd listen to me. He might let out a forced chuckle here and there. But he was just determined to sulk about his current situation, which was being in jail with charges that were probably pretty serious since he never talked about them, mixed with uncertainty about his future, which is the same thing all inmates pretty much are dealing with in there, just not as poorly as he was. And then one day, I had an idea. See, I was entering a spades tournament hosted by one of the inmates, and I figured if talking, laughing, storytelling isn't really his thing, not his interest here, maybe a few games of cards will be good for him and help get his mind on something fun. So I asked him to be my spades partner in the card tournament happening that day. But in classic Lowe fashion, he said, I don't think so. I'm just gonna go sit outside on the rec court. So I said, okay, not knowing what else to do. So he went out to the rec court and moped around, and I went on and participated in the spades tournament that day. But while I was playing one of the games, I couldn't help but get distracted. I was just thinking about my cellmate, Lo. He wasn't a ball of positive energy, but he was a nice guy. He shared and made sure I had stuff if I needed it. He didn't cause trouble. He was respectful of this shared space we were in, which is a lot more than many cellmates would do. I felt bad. I was just kept thinking, how can I help Lo snap out of it and liven up a little bit? At this point, it was my turn to play a card in the spades game, and I had been zoned out, lost in thought for a little while. And I heard my spades partner say from across the table, "Yo, hey man, you all right? It's your move." I snapped out of it and played a card and said, "Yeah, my bad. It's just my cellmate, Lo. I mean, y'all know how he is. I've been trying all type of stuff to just boost his mood and lift his spirits, but nothing works with that guy. I even tried to get him to come play spades with us, but he didn't even want to pretend to think about saying yes." The other fellas just kind of knowingly shook their head, and one guy on the opposite team casually said, "Well, I could have told you asking him to play cards wasn't going to work. He won't come anywhere near them no matter what you're playing." I was curious. Yeah, Lo was negative about everything, but the way this guy said it, he made it seem like cards especially, more than anything, were a big no-go for Lo. So I asked, "Why cards? What's up with that?" And what he told me next would nearly make the room spin. He said, "Well, you know Lo is in here for murder, right? Well, the guy and the girl they say he killed are both on these playing cards." He quickly shuffled through a small stack of cards that were no longer relevant to the game of spades we were in the middle of and put down a card. "That's the guy, and some girl too," he said. I looked, and it was Chris, Amber's then boyfriend, who was also murdered. My mind is racing while I'm looking at this picture, and I know he said some girl too. And just to kind of confirm, I said, "Red shirt, named Amber?" "Yeah," he said, "that's her." And he went on to say, "They only update the card decks every few years, so both of them are still on these cards for unsolved murders, even though they finally found out it was him. And man, ever since he saw those two on the cards a few months ago, he can't stand to look at them." Man, this information hit me like a truck. I barely had the mental clarity to finish the game at that point, but by the time we did, it was lockdown time, and I headed back to my cell that I share with Lo, with a million thoughts running through my mind. Now, I did confront him about what I'd been told, and right when I did, he pretty much began talking more than the entire time we had been cellmates combined. He was spouting things out anywhere from "it wasn't me, I'm innocent, I'm the wrong guy," all the way to breaking down into tears and just repeating how he didn't want to go to hell, he doesn't want to go to hell. Hearing and seeing all of this, I was just overwhelmed. Now, he did eventually plead guilty to both charges in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence. But as for me, that night in the cell with him, I'd love to sit here and tell you I did what I had to do, and I got my own form of prison justice in the name of my friend. But the truth is, I didn't do that. But if nothing else, it was established that he wasn't going to be able to stay here in this cell or this cell block with me, and that he would need to leave and find some other place to go. So the following morning, that's exactly what he did, and he was moved to a new cell block. A few hours later, I got a new cellmate. He went by the name Valencia, and he was pretty friendly, laid back, conversational. He was older than me, but all in all, he seemed like a pretty good guy for what little I knew about him. We would go on to spend the next 6 months as cellmates, trading stories, laughing. He even taught me how to play chess. Now, Valencia would often get visits from his wife and his teenage daughter. Coincidentally, he would tell me how his teenage daughter was actually dating a guy who had recently been arrested and was in the same jail that we were in now, and that he had been arrested for being the second man involved in the murders of Chris and Amber. This was pretty surprising to me, and he went on to say, of course, he wasn't happy about that relationship, but what could he do? And that his daughter assured him she thinks he is innocent, but if somehow he does get found guilty, she will leave him no questions asked. And ultimately, he did. And so she did. But the wildest twist of this whole story is one that I wasn't even aware of until 10 years later. 2 weeks ago, in fact. See, Valencia's daughter had a best friend at the time who would always go with her to the jail and wait outside while her best friend, Valencia's daughter, had her visits with her father and her boyfriend. After these visits, Valencia's daughter would come out, see her best friend again, and she would tell her all about how the visits went, some things they talked about, normal conversations like that. And what I came to find out just 2 weeks ago when I was telling this story in my living room is that the best friend of Valencia's daughter was my current girlfriend, Ariel, and that while I was in jail, a decade before we ever even knew each other, she was often right outside my building. And now, here we are. Pretty wild, huh?